and welcome to the 508th Imagine Greater Buffalo program, hosted by our wonderful Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, and the 130th on their YouTube channel. We're so glad you've joined us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or Cezanne, as I like to pronounce the acronym, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you do have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We are recording this program, so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channel, and we certainly hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speaker. Jennifer Rizzo-Choi has served as Executive Director of the International Institute of Buffalo since 2022. She was previously on the organization's board of directors since 2016, during which she served in a multitude of roles and oversaw a variety of projects, including increasing the Institute's revenue base and advocacy profile. Prior to joining the Institute, Rizzo-Choi had worked in both local and national legal and humanitarian protection circles, including at Journey's End Refugee Services and the Ronald McDonald House Charities of Western New York. She began her career as a TV journalist in Buffalo, also in Fort Myers and Burlington, Vermont, and is admitted to practice law in New York State and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So now let's hear from Jennifer Rizzo-Choi. Jenny, take it away.
Thanks for the introduction. It's great to see everybody online. I've been asked to join today to talk about the International Institute's role in our community, and talk about the growth of our population with the foreign-born and refugees who are coming. So I did put together a PowerPoint. So I'm going to try to speed through it fast. There's a lot to cover in 30 minutes, and there may be some questions that come in. So please, if you do have a question, send that in through the chat, and Dennis will let me know, what people are interested in discussing. So he's kind of covered my resume. Pretty much I'm a legal aid attorney for the immigrant population and have been throughout my career. And now I'm running an organization that does refugee resettlement. So I wanted to talk to everybody a bit today about the International Institute and our history, what we've been doing in this community, and talk a little bit about all these different words we're all hearing in the news daily now: immigrant, refugee, asylum seeker, asylee, humanitarian parolee. What do all of these things mean for Buffalo? And how can you get involved and help? So the Institute itself, in case anyone doesn't know, our mansion right there, that's a beautiful drawing of it, is it's on Delaware Avenue on Mansion Row. We were founded in 1918 as a program, part of the YWCA at the time. It was intended to help serve the female wives of World War I soldiers who were returning, who had gone overseas and fought for us, and married a French girl, German girl, someone from Europe, and brought them back, and they needed to learn English and go through the citizenship exam. So we started out with classes and cultural gatherings, lots of stuff related to food, and we only really grew from there. The mission of the Institute is refugee resettlement, or what we like to call new American integration. We look at everybody here as a new or soon to be American, and we want to help successfully support them integrate into our community. There are 4 other agencies in town, really 5, that deal with refugees in some way that you may have heard of. We're in a partnership with them. We meet, I actually just had a meeting today with the executives of those agencies. We meet bi-weekly now. We call ourselves the Refugee Partnership because we kind of cover the whole spectrum of refugee services. The International Institute, I would say our USP, our unique selling proposition, is that we've been around for 100 years doing this work. We have no religious affiliation, whereas some of the other agencies do. The kind of work we do, we're very focused specifically on employment, and we have a great employment program to get people employed in their careers and in fields here in Buffalo. And we've always been doing cultural work, which includes those classes, foreign language classes, folk dancing, cultural gatherings, etc., since we're so plugged into the different ethnic communities. So talked a little bit about what integration means. For someone to be successful when they come to this country, they have to be able to get settled in and provide for themselves and their family. So we do that initially through case management. We greet somebody at the airport. We are aware of their arrival. If they're coming as a refugee from overseas, we usually have about 2 weeks heads up notice, sometimes longer. So we've already probably rented an apartment for them, and we pick them at the airport, take them home, provide them with their first hot meal that's from their cultural ethnic background, and a case manager goes through a basic orientation on what their house is like, because they're going to be living in America now. We work with them on employment services. We get at least one member of the family into our job club where they have a job coach. We work with them on building a resume, learning the soft skills of employment in the US, and we work with a network of employers in our region who have openings to try to get people placed and set them up for success in that job. We also do specialized case management. We help people if they have medical needs. Sometimes we have people coming from a refugee camp. They haven't seen a doctor in years, and we need to immediately get them enrolled so that way they can go and have an appointment. We have also, for many years, run a very successful interpreting and translation business. It's a small business that's a revenue generator for our nonprofit. Since so many people over the last century have come to Buffalo not speaking English, whether it was like my ancestors, the Italians and the Germans, or the Irish or the Polish, or today's refugees from Afghanistan, Ukraine, Syria, they all need to be able to go to the doctor, have their kids get into school, go to the DMV, rent an apartment, go to the bank. All those things are hard to do when you don't speak English. And so we provide interpreters to them. And a lot of times businesses like the courts, the schools, city governments hire us for our interpreting services. So it's a great little fee-for-service revenue generator for our organization. Part of our mission as well is on education, and that's educating our community about how we are a global community and how people coming into our region has positively affected that. We do that through a program we call International Exchanges in Education. You see a photo here of kids participating in Model UN. We've actually run the area high school Model UN program for the last 30 years. We're the ones that set it up, and it's great to see the students all get involved. There's over 500 kids that participate annually. We also offer cultural competency trainings to places like Roswell Park. They have new doctors coming on, new nurses, and they're dealing with a refugee population to learn about where people came from and what their concerns are, what the nuances are in dealing with that culture. We do a bunch of different things as well, including hosting international delegations that come from the State Department that want to learn about America and learn about American democracy. So that's a great way to educate and support our community, since we are the international center for all things in Buffalo. The last program I'll touch on briefly is our Survivor Services program. We serve immigrant or foreign-born victims of domestic violence and of human trafficking, both sex and labor trafficking. Unfortunately, people are vulnerable and exploited in our community, and immigrants in particular, those who don't speak English or those who don't have documents, tend to be exploited or more easily exploited than other groups. And so we have found that it's important to provide a case manager and services and advocate for people, and we will go with them to the courts, to the police, help them get an order of protection or whatever it is that they need. And we can do that all with cultural support and in their own language. So the future of the Institute, as we look forward and build and work on our strategic plan, I think is very promising. Interested in partnering with the library actually coming up, because we recently tapped into our archives and discovered that we've got 100 years worth of documentation that we'd love to get digitized, all the case files from all of our years of serving people over the decades. We are looking to resume cultural gatherings again in our building. We're looking to plan more classes so that way there can be a cultural exchange. And we are in the process right now of updating our map for adventurous eaters. Best way to learn about new culture in a new part of the world right here in Buffalo is to go experience the food. And we've got so many fascinating restaurants that have been started by new Americans. And we've always produced this map. It's been on paper, but we're actually moving to a digital format. So soon to be coming. Hope you would be interested in learning more and participating in that. So, why have this talk today? And I'm so honored that I was asked to speak. I really want to talk about why having foreign-born people come to our community is a good thing for us, and it's not a scary thing. And there's a lot of economic sustainability. There's a lot of human rights obligations that we're upholding, but it's really about helping Buffalo grow and move us forward on a great new track. And we see that with the growth, because for the first time in over 50 years, the 2020 census revealed growth in our population instead of population decline. And the growth was specifically attributed toward the foreign-born. And it's a substantial number. 10% of the city of Buffalo is foreign-born now. That's 7% of Erie County. We've got people coming in through refugee pipelines, but also to our business incubators, the medical community, the university system. We're welcoming people in from all over the world and bringing in their great hard work and ideas. And that's a benefit to our community. Immigrant residents are paying tons of money in taxes, as you can see here on the screen. They're also more likely, the foreign-born is more likely to start their own small business as well. A lot of entrepreneurial skills that come with immigrants. It's also easier to start a business in some ways for them here than continue on the career track that they were forced to abandon due to a refugee journey. If you were a doctor back home in Afghanistan, of which we have helped several, you're not likely to be a doctor here again, unfortunately. It would be prohibitively expensive and time consuming to go back and do the boards and the medical school all over again. But what we can do is work with you to get you some classes at the community college, get some certifications, and you can maybe be working in a hospital setting, potentially as like a med tech or as a supervisor, because you know a lot of things. And we look to try to either retrack people into their careers or support them with their entrepreneurship goals, which we see a lot happening in our community. So when we talk about who's coming as a refugee, here's a short list of some of the populations that have been welcomed in over the last 2 decades. Here's an updated list as well. The 2 countries at the bottom here in red, Ukraine and Afghanistan, I'll be talking about in a minute. They are examples of populations that are very recent, that are not coming through the regular refugee pipeline, but they are fleeing things and they are in need of humanitarian protection. And the U.S. government in its very bureaucratic structure is still struggling to be able to serve them and address those needs outside of the traditional refugee pipeline. So Ukraine, as an example, as I'm sure many saw in the news, was attacked by Russia in 2022. And it has prompted the largest migration of people outside of Europe since World War II. It has been a challenge for the European Union to deal with, as well as other countries. The European Union did try to make its borders open in a way that's never happened before. And so some people have opted to stay in Europe, and they were granted a temporary work authorization, which is a big critical piece when you become a refugee. Can you provide for yourself elsewhere? A lot of countries say, no, I don't want you working here. You're not from here. But Europe did do that. So that has helped a lot. The US stepped in and said we would take about 100,000 Ukrainians, and they've been admitting them through temporary legal status called humanitarian parole, which grants them work authorization and allows them to be here for a period of time. But unless they apply for a permanent path like asylum, they would be expected to return. And as we can see with what has gone on in Ukraine in the last year, it doesn't look like there's an end in sight currently for that conflict. So this is one of the hallmarks of a refugee journey, that a very long process of waiting and uncertainty tends to loom. Afghanistan is another example of a process that did not go through the overseas pipeline, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, what the classic refugee journey is. Afghanistan was the collapse of a country in pretty rapid fashion in the fall of 2021. Over 60,000 people evacuated. were evacuated by the US government on planes. I'm sure you saw photos like this on the news. And so when they were brought into the US, there was a mad scramble for what to do with them because they hadn't been cleared or checked or given any status, and they were spread across military bases. And then the government turned to resettlement agencies like the Institute and asked, could we please step in and help? And so we have been since transferred cases from military bases, and we've been working with folks to get them jobs and get them housing and get them settled in. They also do not have refugee status. They have humanitarian parole like the Ukrainians, which means they need to apply for asylum if they want to formalize their process and stay here. Afghanistan is a more clear-cut example of the world may never return to the way it was. And so people have been applying for asylum, but that process is quite time-consuming and long. If you did not make it out on the evac, which happened to a lot of people, we're past 10,000 now. I think it's more than that. Those people are now trying to find their own ways out of the country. If they've managed to escape the country, they may have been on a US military base overseas in like Doha, and they're coming now in small family units being processed out, and we get notified about that. So want to talk for a minute about the different ways somebody can be an immigrant here in our country. There's not one pathway. There's a lot of different ways, but it's all challenging. And none of it is for sure going to happen. You could be sponsored through an employer. And there's only a certain number of those visas a year. You could be sponsored by family members, and there's only a certain number of those visas a year unless you qualify as immediate relative, which is a very narrow category and legal definition. You can apply for asylum, but that's a very difficult status to obtain. There's also people who are showing up without documentation, without permission to enter, without a visa, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But the refugee process, the legal definition of a refugee, I want to cover because people don't necessarily realize there's a lot of legal elements that have to be met to become a refugee, and that there's differences in the groups of people who are here. Everyone who is here is a human, and if they've left something and fled something, they're just seeking safety and to not be persecuted. But what they're entitled to when they get here varies based on what their legal status is. So to obtain refugee status and come in as an overseas refugee, you have to have been outside of your home country. You have to be unable or unwilling to return home because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution. And here's the key part, which is called the legal nexus. Persecution is on account of one of these 5 grounds: race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. And you have to be able to prove that in some way. So if someone as a refugee has fled, usually the process is they're going to go through that entire legal vetting in another country before they come to the US. If they are processed and they are awarded refugee status in the United States, then they would come here for resettlement, and they'd be connected to an agency like ours for case management services. Key being here, they get a caseworker that helps them upon entry. They are work authorized upon entry, and they are given some government starter money to help them as they start settling in and integrate. That is very different than other groups who come outside of that pipeline. Like I mentioned with the Afghans, the Ukrainians, or other undocumented populations like we're seeing right now with people who cross the southern border. So overseas refugee processing, which is initially handled by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, like this is a graphic that they put together. It's actually a very time-consuming process that can take sometimes years. And it's not uncommon to meet a refugee in Buffalo who, if they're from Congo or Sudan or Syria, has waited anywhere from 2 to 10 years in a camp or in a third world country waiting for processing and resettlement. It's not uncommon for someone to have waited that long for a spot to open up for them. And they went through that process and that waiting period. And so if you look at the US map today, you can see that New York State is one of the top resettler of refugees. In upstate New York specifically, that's where people are coming in. It's Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, Utica. It's not New York City. Resettlement is actually being put into these upstate or cities because we have available housing, we have affordable housing, we have jobs, we have supportive nonprofits that can help with that integration part and have people be successful. So refugee journey is quite hard. There's a lot of stuff that people face after they get here. And that's part of why the Institute is around to support people, because we have to help them with all of these pieces. There's a flight part, and then there's a resettling and restructuring your life part. And so we want people to be successful, and they, have to process the fact that they're going to be starting over. I go through all of that with the refugee journey because there are so many similar elements to that of an asylum seeker, but there's a very big difference in that the legal status is different. An asylum seeker meets that same, or has to meet that same definition as a refugee that I just went through: the outside of the country, persecution, nexus element, etc. However, that person did not go to a United Nations location like a camp. They maybe didn't have the opportunity to do that where they were geographically located. Instead, they showed up here in the US and they requested asylum on US soil. That means they are now an asylum seeker, and they have to prove that definition of being a refugee through a legal process here, whether it's through paperwork and an application to USCIS, or it's through a trial before immigration court. They may have come through a port of entry. They may have not come through a port of entry. That would be people showing up at the border. Port of entry, though, can be somebody, let's say, who was an Afghan who came on a student visa and was here studying at UB. And I've met a couple that fall into this category where their country just crumbled on TV while they were here on their student experience, and they now can't go back home to the home that they knew. So either way, those individuals have to make an application now for asylum if they want to pursue permanency here. I'm sure everyone has seen the consistent news coverage about the migrants at the border. Migrants referring to people who have migrated from other places. And, for a long time, there was a discussion about them being bused from the border. The most recent busing that's been happening has actually been happening from New York City, because as people were sent to northern cities initially by the governors of these southern states, cities like Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, as they started to amass there, those cities then started to have shelter issues because they have their own regular homeless population, and now they have an influx of other people. It's all been a very difficult and inhumane process to ship people who showed up seeking safety at the southern border to another part of the country, and then they're entering a system that's overwhelmed already and doesn't have the ability to shelter them. And that's what we see happening today at New York City, which is at a crisis point. Billions of dollars have been spent. They are not able to house everybody. There are people sleeping outside on the streets. There's over 100,000 people that have arrived in New York City in the last year. And the mayor there has continued to be on the news, like waving like the red flag of we need help. And he's specifically been asking the US government to do something, because the inertia of our federal bureaucracy and the fact that immigration reform has not happened is sort of tying the hands of people. The migrants that are in New York City, and some of whom have now been bused to Buffalo, about 500 of them, the legal status that they have is that of not being able to work. They are most likely undocumented. Most of the ones we've talked to have been undocumented. They showed up without permission because of them fleeing persecution, but they now need to apply for asylum, and then they're asylum seeking, which is a long process in itself. And so that does not come with work permission, at least not right away. You're supposed to apply for asylum within your first 12 months on US soil. You can apply after that, but there are additional legal hurdles to have to go through. When you apply for asylum, that does not mean you get a work permit. You then have to lodge your application and wait 150 days before you can apply for work permission, and then you have to wait for it actually to be granted, which due to legal statutes, you won't actually get granted it until 180 days after you have lodged your application. So it's a cumbersome process that essentially says the person needs to rely upon the charity of others, or their own financial means, which most people don't have. If they chose to flee their country with nothing, then they likely don't have financial means. So the asylum application it's a very difficult legal process. It's something that you really want an attorney to help you with. Certainly would be very difficult if you don't speak English to be able to navigate that system alone. And so when people say to me, well, I don't understand, I'm like, well, would you apply for adoption on your own? Would you go handle your entire house closing on your own? Would you go and handle an estate proceeding on your own? Those are all legal processes as well. And so that's really sort of where we are right now, where we've been seeing an influx of people that have been transferred from New York City, and they're now trying to get their way through this asylum process, and there's just a limited means of agencies to help them, free lawyers to be able to help them. So it's all been a challenge. So I will close in saying that there are lots of ways for you to learn more and help. You certainly can get involved by volunteering with us. You can donate. You can come to some of our events. We have a big fundraiser actually coming up next week, Thursday. So if you go to our website, www.iibuffalo.org/comedy, you can learn more about that fundraiser. Because we're still selling tickets for it. It's actually a very famous comedian who is a former refugee who's flying in from Hollywood to do a benefit performance night for us. So great way to get involved and learn more about our organization. But I have a few minutes left on this half hour, so I'm going to pause, Dennis, to see if any questions came in or if you have any questions yourself.
Well, Jenny, you provoked, I hope, a lot of questions. This is your opportunity, folks, to do so. Jenny, I'll start it off while others are submitting them, and we'll hear what their questions are. But you and the other groups, and you might want to mention the other groups that you partner with. You built a culture that reinforces our tagline, Buffalo, the city of good neighbors. And I'm just if the county executive didn't give approvals, we wouldn't be able to do what we do well here, apparently. Do you want to comment on that culture building exercise? You have to have common council people, you have to have mayors, you have to have a population that supports your efforts. Do you feel like that's what's been developing over literally this 100-year period?
I do think that that's what Buffalo is and has been developing. And I think it's been decades of immigrants coming. We're going to be involved hopefully soon in the bicentennial of the Erie Canal. We had immigrants building that too. People were coming here for a new life and a new home. My Italian ancestors, same thing. They fled Sicily because of bad conditions. And it's actually interesting you asked this question because September is welcoming month. Welcoming Immigrants Month, and being a good neighbor starts with a welcome. You have to welcome people. And just like if you move to a new neighborhood, it's nice if your neighbor comes over next door with some muffins. Well, it's the same thing if you come here and you don't speak English and your kids are starting school. You don't want your kids to go into school and be mocked and ridiculed in their first days there. They're not going to be successful. You're not going to want to necessarily, stay in a community that's unwelcoming. And this isn't just about refugees. This is about foreign-born people who are coming to our universities and coming to be doctors. We have a shortage of nurses in our community. And where are we going to be able to get that if we're not always growing it from within? I've talked to other communities that have wanted to bring in refugees, and they look at it very specifically as a labor issue. And they're like, well, we have declining population and we have all these open jobs and we want to do refugee resettlement. And I met with the city last year, city government, about it. And it's like, okay, that's great. But are your schools ready to accept that population? What about your local county social services? What about the hospitals? You're going to need to talk to them about making sure they have access to interpreters and things. It's not just we want people to come and work. There's more that goes into it. And a big part of it is understanding that we are part of a global community and we all have come from somewhere else, and it's important to be welcoming.
Great. Maureen, how are we doing for questions?
We have two that are pretty much the same. In regards to the wait time for being cleared to work as an asylum seeker, what are the chances the work permits will be granted in less than 6 months? That permission would seem to regularize resettlement.
It would, and it's unfortunately tied up in a legal structure. Years ago, people were allowed to apply for a work permit right when they applied for asylum, and there was what was considered a frivolous abuse of the asylum process by not real asylum seekers. And so they put that requirement in to have a delayed wait between application, lodging of asylum, and employment permission. So there's no way currently that someone could get that employment authorization expedited, even though I keep hearing our elected officials talk about having that done. They would actually need to have the law changed, or the president could change the category of legal status that people are in to allow them to be in a work eligible category. But as it exists right now, it's 180 days from the lodging of application.
Okay. I also have, how can we, members of the public, support asylum seekers, immigrants, and refugees?
I think the best way is to start educating yourself by doing talks like this, going on our website, coming to events, and seeing how you can either donate your funds or your time. I think that there's an easy way to get plugged in. We've got opportunities to set up apartments, to go and mentor refugees, to get involved with us, even coming to our event next week. And you can learn more. There's a lot of ways to help out. I have an amazing staff here of 80 people, but we cannot be everything to everybody all the time. And so we have to move people along in their process, right? So they get a lot of case manager support in the first coming weeks. And as we move them through their period, they have to start becoming more self-sufficient. So we always love when volunteers go through our training and background checks, because we can then assign them to be mentors to our new neighbors. And that's so helpful and welcoming.
Great. I think that's about it.
All right. We're a border city. We've had the blessing of our history in America of not having refugees pouring in from Canada. Other states in the southern tier have a different issue in the south, and I'm just wondering. It's a unique position for Buffalo to build upon, and it looks like you're the lead ship, if you will, in this armada of dealing with folks from other countries. There's a couple hundred countries out there, and it's seeking entry not only into the United States, but in a place where they can feel comfortable when they've arrived. I'm curious, average length of time, average, I know they're probably extremes, but that you end up dealing with somebody where they're really connected with the international institutes. How long are you engaged with people on average?
Well, it really depends on the programming, which a lot of it is government funded, federal and state. So we try to keep clients with us for anywhere from core funding from the feds is 90 days. We get a lot of supportive funding that allows us to do a year of services, and we are able to keep people up until 5 years, depending on the programs we can get them in. So I would say, we generally try to be present in someone's lives for the first 5 years of their lives, whether that's they're coming back for ESL classes, they're coming and getting help with their citizenship application, or they're coming because their family members are now coming through the refugee pipeline and they're going to be the U.S. tie. We try to go to people's naturalization ceremonies, as that's a seminal moment in their lives. We try to engage with the ethnic communities. There's a lot of community groups that have built up around the new populations. Just like there's an Italian American club that's active to support the Italians of a long time ago that came. There's also the Karen Association today, the Afghan American Association, and we try to give space to them to have events here so that way we can continue to help build those community supports so people are successful. So I don't view the Institute as having a timestamp on anyone's experience with us, because I want them to keep coming back to us. We should be like the Ellis Island of Western New York. That's what we're striving to be. We want to be the place that everyone comes to share their culture and continue to work on the integration process.
Well, as you mentioned in the beginning, it's our 200th anniversary coming up in a couple of years of the Erie Canal. It really started there. People heading out west or staking a claim here in Western New York. And as we celebrate it, it would seem you and your connections with all these wonderful festivals that we have, Polish festivals, Italian festivals, Hispanic, we just had. And I imagine that's your immediate outreach connections with those organizations, to give you a hand as you reinforce their efforts. So, Jenny, it's been a great learning session, certainly from my standpoint, and I hope for all involved here. We're going to welcome next week. We're going to have Jeffrey Lebsack, director of the River Line, that great project that connects the Buffalo River as part of a project of the Western New York Land Conservancy. So join us then. I'm sure you'll find that of interest as well. I'm Dennis Galecki. Be well and good day.